Wallace as critic also is an important thing, rather than just setting us all on the path. I mean, that's the core of that. You know, we talk about reflective practice in that loop, learning theory, taking it critically, taking it into the field, seeing what floats and what doesn't. How do we alter it? How do we take it through those situations and then reconceptualize what it is that we're doing? Why? The core of the ethics implicit in all of that. Also, my knowledge of Wallace, my experience with him, my history with him is of, and one of the major reasons why I sought him out as the chairman for both my master's thesis and my dissertation, is that I knew, number one, he gets me to a degree that facilitates that whole process, but also that I would never be allowed to skate something by. I knew that I would be pushed, and I knew that I would be expected to come up with something worthy, and that that also would be an active process, and that would be a powerful part of producing anything really good through this whole journey, is having a critic there who understands, who knows, and who, through his own experience and through his experience with you and the building of that relationship, is going to push to have you produce something that's worthy of you. And you need someone who can be a critic, and Wallace can definitely do that. But back to that initial point that I made, the way that he has of doing things like that is such that rather than building up a dynamic of resistance to it because you were being pushed in an incorrect kind of a way, an inappropriate kind of a way, a knee-jerk or reflexive kind of a way, that there is a level of understanding there and a level of skill in that interaction that, again, we learn from and take farther and take to internalize into that work and that process. Something else that I'm thinking of I'm reminding myself as I talk through all this stuff, was one of the initial lessons in ethics in the field. Also came from there. The conception that we tend to have of conflict resolvers as mediators, a direct link like that, was something that I, as many people, came into the field thinking. And that lasted as far as my first class with Wallace, where it really became clear that there is a whole series of other options here, and not just options, but the probability that we need to rethink that connection of conflict resolution, resolve the conflict, end the conflict, mediator, get everybody together, talk, dialogue. Yes, it's necessary, yes, as an end state, but there's a lot of process that leads up to that. And that working with those power imbalances so that you have the critique of the field that peace often serves the powerful, it serves the status quo, and that if you are on the vulnerable end, the short end of a stick, on the power dynamics, the balances that are going back and forth with the participants in this conflict, if one simplistically works for peace, then one is potentially doing a great deal of harm. Now, that's an incredibly useful thing to have. That's a useful conception to have. It's a necessary, a vital conception to have, so that we understand that there may be a whole series of things that we have to do before we can get to that end state. Chris Mitchell had broken that down in an instrumental kind of a way in his 17, I think it's 17 now, the list seems to keep expanding. Different roles, the advocate, the trainer, the inskiller, this whole thing. And possibility not only that it may not be a good thing to mediate right now, but that I may need to raise some hell. Something has to break, something has to fight, something has to, that the beginnings of that discussion in my own head and where I've taken my conceptions of the field and where we're going came from that class, as well as the most basic ethical question that I think we face, which is, who am I? Who am I to say peace can come? Who am I to say it's not time for that? The power imbalance is too strong. More blood needs to hit the ground before peace happens. Who am I to say this? What kind of... it became kind of a running joke and something that I've thought at many stages all the way through, that in a sense there are... the warning that we have to ourselves is not to become the philosopher king, and that also came from him, that conception of, given the education, given the experience that we have, given our position here where someone looks to us and says, what do we do next? Be cautious of becoming the philosopher king who says, behold, I have brought peace, and our own hubris, our own arrogance can get mixed in with our work if we are not very careful about it. That discussion for me began with him in that first class, and that was a vital thing to have. I can't imagine going through this field, going through these programs and going into this field and not having that as a part of my background, not having that understanding that with this comes potentially great ethical burdens that we have to think through, we have to be able to at least be conscious of, and that has to get folded in with our work. I've joked since that we are warriors, fools, and philosopher kings, the trifecta, the Holy Trinity, the warnings and the hope. Fools in the sense of speaking truth to power, the jester who can speak despite the risk, who must speak despite the risk. The warriors in the metaphorical sense who work with that conflict in active ways, hands-on ways, the people who go and do. And the philosopher king, the warning and the power and the warning that's implicit in all of those, and that whole discussion. Again, I draw back to those first discussions and that process, that sense of process, that sense of breaking down what we do into a long conception of process, and what do we do when, how do we conceive of ourselves, how do we conceive of that process, how do we think it through and feel it through, come into connection with the people who are there, empathize with them and with ourselves, and make that process one which has the greatest hope of success. That, again, those discussions that we had in 501, the beginning class, I think back on, I remember back on, I reflect on, and the connections that I made in that class with those people in the midst of that conversation. That's a rare kind of a thing to have. I mean, we have it in a general sense, sometimes in a more specific sense, but we really concentrated it in that class and came out with something very special, and all of us who were in that class remember it as such. So again, the foundation, the roots, the conception of process and peace, and what does this mean that we all do? What is this strange field that we are in, and how do we think of it, and how do we work with it, and how do we move past hubris and arrogance and get to something truly useful, to work with the ethics, to work with the everything. I could go on and on about that, but that really covers it, and that's the really important stuff that I'd like to get down. So again, thank you. It's been an honor.